Now we carry on with our Bible study of the kings of Israel and Judah. You remember last week that we looked at Abijam and Baasha. Today we come to King Asa. Now King Asa should be more famous than he is. He ruled for 41 years, which is the longest of all the kings of Israel or Judah, including David and Solomon. And he was a good man. So I don't know why he's not more famous, but we're going to spend time on him today.
In the 20th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, Asa began to reign over Judah, and he reigned 41 years in Jerusalem. And Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as David his father had done. He removed all the idols that his father had made. He also removed Maacah, his mother, from being queen mother because she had made an abominable image for Asherah. Asa cut down her image and burnt it at the brook Kidron.
Now a number of very good things come out of this reading. The first is I notice that Asa was wholehearted in his commitment to God, as his father David had been. That's of course his great-grandfather. It's wonderful actually to come across somebody in this list of kings who was wholehearted in his commitment to God. There are not so many of them. All the kings of Israel, without exception, are introduced with the sentence, "He did evil in the sight of the Lord." That's a very sad and dreary list. The kings of Judah are a bit better. We saw that Abijam, Asa's father, was somewhat committed to God. But here's a man wholly committed to God, and that brings such pleasure. He wasn't perfect. Nobody is. In fact, in the Bible, there are very few characters other than Jesus who aren't shown to have problems and sins. The one big exception to that is Joseph, the only other major character in the Bible, as far as I know, who doesn't appear to have a single fault. But then Joseph was given a special role in Scripture, and that was that his life was a type of Christ. And so he did that, and he was good. But we can't all be like that. But Asa did show some wonderful traits, and one of the most important things he did to show his devotion to God is he got rid of idols. Now I want to talk for a few minutes about Israel and idols. There was something about idols that attracted them, and they could never seem to let it go. Right from 1,000 years back, when Moses was up the mountain receiving the law, what did the people persuade Aaron to do? Make them a golden calf. And so on, right down through the next 1,000 years, time and time again, they turned back to idols. Right down to the Babylonian captivity. Now here's an interesting thing. Israel and Judah, the Jews, never stopped turning to idols up till the time of the Babylonian captivity. And after the Babylonian captivity, they never went back to an idol again. So the discipline really worked. Now idols to our Western minds seem rather stupid. You take a piece of wood, someone carves it into a shape, maybe you put some gold leaf on top of it, then you bow down and say, "You are my God." Now we think that's rather absurd, but maybe not quite as absurd as you think. One of the things I've come to realize is some strange way demons seem to be tied to places and objects. I don't understand it. But it may be that once you've carved your idol and put it up there, and you actually are inviting demons to come and possess it, that maybe they actually do. So you're not just worshipping a piece of wood. Wendy and I have been very careful down the years. We don't have any objects in our house that could be questionable and we don't know the background of. I remember we had some teaspoons with some Hindu-looking gods' faces on them. And Wendy took a file and just filed off all those faces. And in the end, actually, we threw away the teaspoons. We just feel, why take a chance? And so they were drawn to idols, and they couldn't seem to stop it. But one of the great things Asa did is he took all the idols he could find, he took them down into the Kidron Valley, and there he burnt them. Now you need to understand a little bit of the geography of Jerusalem to understand that. The Kidron Valley is right down in front of the Golden Gate of the Temple. And if you stand in the Kidron Valley and look up, you will just see this wonderful Temple of Solomon towering above you. And down in the valley, he burns them. And the symbolism, I think, is God is mighty, you are down in the valley, and I'm burning you. It's a symbol of what is later said so wonderfully in Ephesians, that God has put all things under Christ's feet, whether in heaven, on earth, or under the earth. The under the earth is referring to the demon world. And there the symbol is, the temple's on the hill, and they burn it in the valley. The God of Israel is supreme. Actually, another symbolism of the Kidron Valley is he must have burnt those within about 100 meters of where the Garden of Gethsemane later stood. And Jesus agonized over the idolatry of his world. And so Asa destroyed the idols, and he did something extremely courageous. He demoted his own mother from being the queen mother. Now that takes some courage. I don't know about your mother, but I'm not sure I would have done something like that. But she wouldn't give up her love of the Asherah poles, and so he demoted her. That took some courage, and it cleaned it out. What I love about Asa, and I think it's such a positive message here, is that Asa rose above his background. We are not condemned to live out what our parents and grandparents handed down to us. Now there is a curse in the Old Testament that the sins of the father will be visited on the children to the third and fourth generation. And that does happen. But it can be broken, and Asa breaks it. His father Abijam, you remember, was only half-hearted in his commitment to God. His mother was addicted to idolatry. And Asa cut those things off, and he changed things. And we can do that by the power of Jesus. Look at Ephesians chapter 1, at the supremacy of Christ. Claim that. And then you can break away from that curse that might have been passed down generation to generation. I'm currently writing up the story of someone called Wilfred Venus. Hopefully you'll be able to see the whole story on my website pretty soon. Wilfred was literally born during a bombing raid in the middle of the Second World War in Düsseldorf. And he spent his childhood in ruins, in hunger, and worse still, with a father who was an alcoholic. He can remember his father shouting and screaming at them. He remembers his father throwing food out the window if he didn't like it. His father, when he was drunk, sometimes would lock them out of the house and they'd have to spend the night on the streets. It was dreadful. But Wilfred remembers the day when he was only 6 years old, 70 years ago now, that he took a decision: I will not be like my father in the matter of alcohol and in the matter of the way I treat my family. 6 years old, he broke the chain. And it's a wonderful thing when someone does that. And so we come to our second reading.
And there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel. Baasha built Ramah, that he might permit no one to go out or come in to Asa, king of Judah. Then Asa took all the silver and the gold that were left in the treasures of the house of the Lord, and sent them to Ben-hadad, king of Syria, saying, Go, break your covenant with Baasha, king of Israel, that he may withdraw from me. And Ben-hadad listened to King Asa, and sent the commanders of his army against Israel. And when Baasha heard of it, he stopped building Ramah.
And so Asa found himself at war with Baasha, he who bashed the brains out of all his opponents. These were Judah and Israel at war. They are actually brothers. It's a very sad thing when brothers go to war. The results of civil war are just frightful. Baasha particularly sets out to stop trade and movement between Israel and Judah, because there were still a lot of the 10 northern tribes who liked to come south to the temple and try to keep the old faith. Baasha wanted to stop that. So this place called Ramah essentially was a blocking place with big walls. How the world loves walls. Walls all over Ireland. Walls all over Israel nowadays. And so he puts up the city, and he's starting to put it up, and it's going to cause a lot of trouble to Asa. So Asa goes into the temple and takes all of the treasures out. Now let me explain a little bit about what happened to those treasures. Solomon, of course, had the most luxurious treasures the world had seen. But in the reign of Rehoboam, a man called Shishak came and stole them all. Shishak's a rather wonderful name, isn't it? Isn't there a poem about that? Shishak sells seashells on the seashore or something. And Shishak stole all the stuff. Rehoboam tried to rebuild the treasures. Most of what had been gold now was made of bronze, but still quite a treasure had been built up. Now Asa takes all of those treasures and sends them up to the king of Syria, Ben-hadad, and says to him, I want you to break your treaty with Baasha and help me to kick him out from this place called Ramah. Ben-hadad does it, good price, and he accepts it. And so Baasha gives up and backs down. But what a cost, all the treasures of the treasury gone. Civil war is always particularly costly, I've discovered. At the start of the American Civil War, someone famously said, a lady's thimble will be able to hold all the blood that will be shed in this war. Well, how wrong can you be? And so we come to our third reading.
Hananai the seer came to Asa king of Judah and said to him, Because you relied on the king of Syria and did not rely on the Lord your God, you have done foolishly in this, and from now on you will have wars. Then Asa was angry with the seer and put him in the stocks in prison.
It's been so nice to read of someone whose life was wholly dedicated to the Lord, and the Lord honored that, particularly in a battle that was fought against a massive army from Ethiopia. And Asa asked the Lord to fight the battle for them, and he did, and they won a great victory, and they won back, by the way, a lot of treasure that way. But in his old age, something somehow starts to go wrong. And then Hananai comes to see him. And this is another one of those heroes that we've been reading about, just called Hananai the seer, one who sees things. And Hananai comes and rebukes Asa, particularly for trusting in the king of Syria instead of trusting in God, as he did with Ethiopia. And he says, because you did that and you let the king of Syria get away, you're going to have trouble for the rest of your reign. And Asa, this man who's been wholly dedicated to God, is in such a rage that he takes the prophet, puts him in stocks, puts him in prison, and locks the door. And thereby he breaks the age-old rule, don't shoot the messenger. But it's sad to see someone who has been wholly committed to God for so long, somehow slipping. I don't know what caused it. And then as he comes to the end of the life, we read,
In the 39th year of his reign, Asa was diseased in his feet, and his disease became severe. Yet even in his disease he did not seek the Lord, but sought help from physicians.
He was diseased in his feet. I don't know what that meant. But when your feet are diseased, it makes life very difficult. I've got a picture here of me standing at Jericho Point in February, minding my own business, looking across the sea. There was some lovely wave breaking, but I reckoned I was safe. Well, I was wrong. Two enormous waves came one after the other, and the next thing, I was sent flying across that rock surface there. Now, I don't think I was in particular danger because you can see it's a big flat area and I was probably going to be safe. But it's covered in barnacles. And I was struggling underwater to stop the scraping and whatever. And when eventually the water subsided, my hands were bleeding, my costume was torn, my backside was bleeding. I'm reminded there of Shakespeare's words, there is a divinity that shapes our ends. Well, my end got reshaped at that moment. And then as I tried to gather myself together, my camera, by the way, had gone completely underwater, but luckily the camera bag protected it. I realized I'd lost a slip-slop. Now here I stood, bleeding and bruised, in the middle of all those barnacles. Do you know how absolutely stranded I felt without a shoe? Asa ended his life with diseased feet. And we read, sadly, that in the matter of his feet also, he trusted in physicians but did not trust in the Lord. And so a sad ending to actually a wonderful life. But at the end he had a good funeral.
And Asa died in the 41st year of his reign. They buried him in the tomb that he had cut for himself in the city of David. They laid him on a bier that had been filled with various spices prepared by the perfumer's art, and they made a very great fire in his honor.
Someone once told me, Andrew, you do good funerals, will you do mine? And my answer always was, oh, with pleasure. But he had a good funeral, a lovely coffin, beautiful perfumes and all the rest. And then they built a huge bonfire in his memory, because at the end of the day, he had followed the Lord with all his heart. He had faults, but they honored him, and I think God honored him too. I remember when my dad died, he'd had Alzheimer's for 15 years, and we didn't have his coffin at the funeral, and I took the funeral, and it just didn't go well for me, and for months afterwards I just felt down and not happy. Then my mom died, and I said to my brother and sister, if you don't mind, I'm not doing this funeral. I want to just sit there and be one of the mourners. And we managed to arrange to take my mom's coffin to the graveside, and I saw her face again, and then we closed the coffin and we let her down into the grave, and all the family and the grandchildren were there. Then we went off to the church and had a wonderful Thanksgiving service. And people talked about my dad from the years when he was healthy again. And you know, from the end of that funeral, I was fine. And it showed me the great value of a good funeral. I'm a great believer, actually, in having the coffin at a funeral. And so there we have Asa, a man wholly committed to God, a man with faults, of course, but God loved him, and we honor him today.